I had a very interesting conversation today, to say the least. Reason being, every day I have a beautiful conversation. You never know where a conversation can go. This is why it's always best to try to just be nice to people. Small talk can go a long way. So I was talking to this guy and we were talking about the robots. How are we starting to see them? The driverless cars, the food carts. And I was telling him, do you have, well, I asked him rather. And then I told him, do you have small children? And he told me the ages of his children. He had some adult children as well. So I said, have you noticed the AI people who have videos now? And he was like, no, I haven't seen that. I said, yeah, check it out. Pay attention to what your children are watching with their phones. And he was like, these phones, they're the devil. And I was saying, you know what? What they do with the phones expose the devil. And he said, you know what? You're right. I said, so does the music. And he was like, yeah, and of course the music. He told me that his son lives in Atlanta. And they even have the robot police dogs patrolling certain areas. So I'm like, wow. And he said, you never thought that this day was going to come. I mean, 20 years ago, who would have thought? We see it in movies, but you never would have thought that we will see these robots. So again, we're talking about the enemy and how you can kind of detect them. So I said, where a big chunk of this started, the systematic cycle of just the way things are to keep you in cycles, prisons, because he mentioned the men are like, it's like a trap to keep them in prison, women to keep them trapped having babies. And I said, where a big chunk of that started, right? In these church buildings, I said. So he said, do you think? And I'm like, absolutely. He said, but I think grandmama and them were more spiritual and they took it more serious than we do today. And I was like, you think so? Now, you remember your grandma gossiping? And he said, yeah. I say, and you can't forget about when grandma was having an affair with Henry on the other block. He said, oh no, I remember that too. I'm going to go see a man about a dog. I say, and then they go to church on Sunday and they hooting and they hollering. And they praying and then they go home and then they gossiping about their own sisters and brothers. If you see a problem is wrong with a family member, the objective is to help them, not talk about them. He was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. So I said, whenever you do things on the opposite side of the Lord God, and you've heard me say this before a number of times in a few of my episodes, the other episodes, it's demonic activity. That is like you're in agreement or in partner with the enemy. Now, this is why their house is in such a disarray. I said, and when we started talking about it, I'm thinking, and this is the mindset when it came to the older people back then. What goes on in this house stays in this house. If their daughter or their cousin or somebody told them that Mr. San or whoever the case may be touched them, sometimes they would believe him and sometimes they wouldn't. The trauma and the foolishness that comes from that alone, but let alone what the enemy does with it, is catastrophic. How many times have you heard that, oh, she had a baby from her uncle, or she had a baby from her daddy? But back then, was these pastors talking to these people about how serious that was? You're trying to pretend like you living a life for Jesus. But what goes on in your house stays in your house, even if you know your child is being abused. But nevertheless, on Sunday morning, they was waking them up bright and early. You better not make me late for church, because they was in there bright and early, hooting and hollering. It's very interesting, the conversations you can have. You just have to be willing to talk about things that really matter and that expose the root of the problem.